Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for October 18th, 2022. We've reached a point at which there is no option but to undergo profound change. The question is, will it be for the better or for the worse? The Western establishment is clearly losing its grip, and it's not going to submit, it's not going to give in, it's going to continue with its utopian schemes to bring the rest of the world under its control. But what's required now is what the journalist Caitlin Johnstone described as breaking out of the propaganda-induced coma, which most of the Western world still is lingering within. A coma which is enforced by the censorship regime, the lying, the fake media, and so on. And what she says is that it's important for everyone who knows better to speak the truth, because every voice chips away at this controlled narrative. Now, look at the recent efforts at censorship. We can start with the Committee to Combat Disinformation and Mirotvorets, the NATO operations run through Ukraine to produce a kill list to silence people who present an alternative. It's not a coincidence that on the initial list of slightly more than 70 names, it included 30 who spoke at Schiller Institute conferences, including the Schiller Institute founder and chairwoman, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Also included people such as Diane Sare, the candidate for U.S. Senator in New York State, the activist Scott Ritter, Tulsi Gabbard. The new list includes Tucker Carlson. Now, you also have the absurd attempt by PayPal to take money from people's accounts if PayPal determines they're spreading disinformation. $2,500 a shot. They're forced to reverse this by saying that it wasn't really fully planned out, but it shows you how far they're willing to go to suppress the truth. And now we have something from the German government, which should know better. In covering up the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage, a question was asked by Sarah Wagenknecht from the Linkspartei to the government. Will they produce what they know about who's behind this? And the government said they're going to refuse to answer questions about what they know for reasons of, quote, state well-being, unquote, including refusing to answer parliamentary inquiry. So the censorship regime is taking on a life of its own. Now, this suppression of free speech is occurring at a moment which is extremely dangerous. There are two nuclear war exercises underway right now. One called Steadfast Noon, which is NATO, which is going on in Europe with planes capable of carrying nuclear weapons crisscrossing the space of the European countries. And there's a similar exercise underway in Russia. Now, while these are occurring, parallel nuclear exercises, we have the latest evidence of a blatant commitment to a global dictatorship coming from spokesmen for the European Union. One from the Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, who's shown herself to be just a mouthpiece for the City of London and Wall Street. What she said is that China and Russia threaten Western hegemony, that is the unipolar order, the idea that one economic model is all that's allowed for any country in the world. She said Russia and China's influence must be curbed in the global south. That is, that they're using their influence to direct opposition to this global model. And she said what must be done is an agreement to cut off access to raw materials to Russia and China, in particular, to stop China's Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road is part of a policy of the Chinese government which lifted 800 million people out of poverty. So her intent is to prevent that model from being applied in Africa and Asia, where there are still hundreds of millions of people who live in poverty. That's what is known as imperialism. Now, she said that she wants to work with Biden to hold a leaders' summit on global oil investment. Obviously a reaction to the recent OPEC Plus agreement, but also a reaction to the alignment that's occurring in the global south to make sure there's adequate energy in opposition to the Malthusian Green New Deal that von der Leyen is a spokesman for. And as part of her plan, she wants to enlarge the European Union. So you'd have global NATO, global EU, and this essentially merges them, as the pathetic Liz Truss said to the United Nations, we need an economic NATO. Now then you have the modern day Colonel Blimp, the spokesman for blatant racist imperialism, Josep Borrell, who's the European Union's foreign minister. He made the statement that Europe is a garden. The rest of the world is a jungle, and people in the jungle wish to invade the garden. Now, while this was denounced by many, many people, it wasn't denounced by people in the European Union, in the government, the Brussels bureaucrats, because that's their vision. Now, this isn't fooling anyone in the global south. It's not leading to nations jumping onto the sinking ship of the European Union and NATO. One former leading Indian diplomat, M.K. Bhadrakumar, wrote a very interesting article where he identified this attempt to establish a unipolar order. He said the attacks on Russian infrastructure, the Nord Stream pipelines and the Crimea Bridge, have made a step further toward control of world economy. But he said it's dominated by U.S. big oil. Now, what he really should have said is the U.S. and British corporate cartels. But he said this is making Europe captive to these American interests. He said they're being played by Americans. But he said this isn't going to save the unipolar world because there's unstoppable momentum toward a new multilateral system. But he writes, quote, Americans are cocooned in a surreal world by their self-serving narrative that Russia lost the war, unquote. And he describes this as a dangerous self-delusion. Well, that, in fact, is reality. It is a self-delusion. This was emphasized by Xi Jinping in his address to the Chinese Communist Party, where he said, we're seeing fundamental shifts in world policy, complete changes, major shifts that cannot be stopped. Well, maybe to von der Leyen and Borrell, they could be stopped by nuclear war. But that's what has to be stopped is the lunatics who are opposing this shift toward a new strategic and financial architecture. The world is shifting toward what Xi Jinping called win-win policy, cooperation for mutual development. Now, look at the contrast. Look at where the West is heading by taking a look at the insanity going on in the United Kingdom. Liz Truss has now been forced to knuckle under to the more traditional City of London establishment. But her policy wasn't a break with the City of London. It was just a more extreme version of the free market policy that's dictated by the global financial cartels. The United Kingdom's been reduced to a clown show. You had Boris Johnson, who was sent as an envoy to tell Zelensky no agreement, no negotiation with Putin. Now you have Liz Truss, who is moving toward a more extreme version of Thatcherism, of a totally deregulated world economy under the control of a global central banker's dictatorship, supposedly in the name of free market and democracy. The shift between quantitative easing and quantitative tightening, raising interest rates, lowering interest rates, flooding markets with liquidity, then withdrawing the liquidity, all of this is a monetarist policy to protect a giant Ponzi scheme which is blowing up in their face. Now, it's now time to break with this kind of monetary policy and go to physical economy, which was the area of expertise developed by Lyndon LaRouche over 5 decades. The Schiller Institute has established itself as a global leader in the discussion process of moving the world from this dangerous set of delusions that somehow you can sustain the control of a small handful of corporate cartels into the idea of win-win cooperation for the development of the sovereign nations in cooperation. So decisions are being made now to create that new financial and strategic architecture. In the West, it's time to break out of that coma. And the best way to do it is to sign up for the Schiller Institute, join our site, become part of our organization, and help us take more people out of this propaganda-induced coma. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to sign up, and I'll see you tomorrow.